Hey everyone, this is Ira Nicodemus, and today we are doing a video as a follow-up or a response to Matt Reisinger's video that he just posted on the Tesla solar roof, and answer some questions I think you may be curious about of what does a system like that cost, what does it save, and do the financials make sense for the average homeowner. So a little bit of background, I've been watching Matt's channel since he had about 10,000 subscribers, and have just always had a lot of admiration and respect for him and what he does. But my business, my full-time company, is Holistic Utility Solutions, and we work with commercial sector buildings for energy efficiency and solar. So when I saw this, there's a little bit of kind of my personal interest and passions on the residential side, combining with what I do professionally. I'm a certified energy manager, NABCET PV associate. I've been doing this work for 15 years around financial analysis and sizing and understanding these type of systems. So I wanted to kind of apply that because I thought it would be interesting to a lot of you when you see a video like that. So a little bit of, as a homeowner, I've owned a home for over 10 years now, and I oftentimes will get questions from other homeowners about solar. They know what I do professionally, and they'll ask questions around, does solar make sense? How big of a system? Should I get batteries? What am I going to save? All those type of questions. So we're going to have to start with some assumptions around this particular system and what it costs. So I'll tell you kind of how I did that. So if we look at the beginning of the video here, there's some drone shots that show the flyover of this space. And it's a beautiful home. It's a large building. My guess is this is probably, maybe a 6,000 to 7,000 square foot house. There are four main buildings that look like they're covered with a roof. Some are one story, some are two story. So what I did was I started by taking and just kind of trying to estimate what the size of those roof systems are. And the way that I did that, I just looked at the different buildings. If I could kind of get a count of how many rows of panels they had, I did that. I also would just take and look at like a standard 4x8 piece of zip-R and use that to estimate. So we came up with this square footage, and it's a total of about 5,600 square foot. And to me, that seems to make sense. If I look at that 5,600 square foot, this home, like I said, if it's 6,000 or 7,000 square foot, but a big chunk of it is a two-story building, depending on the roof pitch and all that, we could calculate it if we had all that information, but it seems like that's probably about right for what we're looking at. So we're going to go with that as an assumption. So now that we have the information of how much roof is covered, let's look at the different components that we're talked about here, the active and inactive tiles, the Powerwall batteries, and then the span panel and the generators, and kind of what all that adds up to. So the active panels for a Tesla solar roof is, as they talked about in the video, there's two types of panels. There's the ones that actually have solar and produce power. Those are 72 watts each. And then there's ones that look the same, but they don't have any active parts. So they're just kind of a glass or metal tile. So we know that the system that they had was a 50 kilowatt system. That's 50,000 watts. So if we take the 50,000 watts of capacity, divide it by 72, that gives us 694 active panels. Now, when we look at the unit size, if you look at the size of a system, this is the spec sheet for the Tesla tile. You see it's 15 inches by 45 inches, and that works out to just under 5 square feet, about 4.7 square foot of coverage each. So dividing or multiplying out the number of tiles, which we got from knowing the wattage each and the total system wattage, and then this, it gives us about 3,200 square foot that's covered with active tiles. Now, as far as our unit cost, Tesla says that their solar roof system sells for about $1.80 per watt. Okay. Now, $1.80 per watt is actually a really good price. If you look at most residential solar systems, if you just have panels, you're retrofitting them onto your roof, you're probably, depending on where you live and all the systems, going to be somewhere from mid $2 per watt range up to as much as $4 per watt, not including batteries. So maybe somewhere in the $3 range is a good estimate. So when they say $1.80 per watt, that is actually a really low price. But keep in mind that you do have all of these other parts around it that we also need to think about, which we'll cover here in a minute. So assuming it's $1.80 a watt for a 72 watt panel, that would work out to about $130 each. Now, I don't know if this includes installation, but for our purposes, we're not going to worry about that because we're saying that they would have to install a roof anyway. So we're going to try to make this the difference, the premium of going with the Tesla solar roof. The extended cost then for just these pieces would be about $90,000. Now remember that there's a 30% tax credit. This is only going to apply to the active panels. It would also apply to the batteries. So when we get 30%, the actual cost of the system is going to be about $63,000 for the active portion. Now, if we look at the inactive tiles, we want all this to match so it all looks the same. So we're estimating there was about 5,600, 5,700 square foot of roof. We know we had about 3,200 from solar. So we're going to need about another 2,400 square foot, which is 520 tiles. Now, I did a little bit of research online, and generally what I hear is that solar, the non-active part, is somewhere around $20 a foot or $2,000 a square. If we look at it in the video, we heard that the total system was 3 or 4 times what a metal roof would be. That also was kind of a check. So what I used here for cost was basically $20 a foot for the inactive tiles, which means they spent about another $50,000, a little under $50,000 on inactive tiles. So these two combined, if we look at this, is the cost of the roof. So that's $138,000. If I look at this versus, let's say, a standard metal standing seam roof, those are probably running let's say somewhere, they said 3 or 4 times as much for this. That would give us around probably $50,000. Kind of makes sense. That'd be around $1,000 a square. So I think that we're going to use that of a cost of about $40,000 for a standard metal roof versus about $140,000 for the Tesla solar roof, both the inactive and the active panels. Now, like I said, if we look at this post-tax incentive, we're down to about $111,000 for the cost of that roof, assuming all of our assumptions so far are correct. Now, when we look at the Powerwall batteries, they have 10 Powerwall units at this site. That is a massive amount of battery. A Powerwall is 13.5 kilowatt hours of capacity each. So essentially, they're carrying enough to have over 130 kilowatt hours of runtime on those batteries. Right now, Powerwall, I believe, is running around 11,500. So we're going to use that number of 115,000 for 10 of them. And then again, we'll get 30% back. So we're actually at a net cost of about 80,000. On the span panels, the smart panels, those I think are running around $4,500 plus installation. They would have to install a panel anyway. So I added about $1,500 for any maybe more specialized installation and commissioning and that. So let's call it 6,000 each, so 12,000 total. And then they said that they have 2 generators. We don't know how big they are. Let's just say they're 22 kilowatt generators. Generally, those are probably going to run somewhere in the 6,000 to 8,000 range each, plus install. So let's say it's 10,000 each for a total of 20,000. So in total, we're going to be around $285,000 for that system. And then after the tax credits on the parts that apply, which is be the actual producing panels and the batteries, we're going to be about $224,000 as a net cost of that system. Now remember that I said that we want to kind of really justify the premium here versus just a standard metal roof without any of the extra fancy equipment. So we're going to back out about $40,000 for the cost of just a standard standing seam metal roof. Which would put us about $184,000. So that's the premium that we're going to need to look at and justify with any savings from that system. So when we look at the next piece here on savings, here's what we did. I took the 50 kilowatt system and I plugged it into PV Watts. PV Watts is a free calculator. You guys can use it. You just put in whatever your location is. I'm going to put in Austin, Texas, because that's where that home was. It's going to pull in local weather data, cloud cover, kind of basic data for that. We can then go ahead and put in 50 kilowatts. This would be the DC power, which is what everyone pretty much talks about when they're talking about size. This is a roof mount system. 14% is probably a good estimate. Tilt, this is based on roof panels, or roof pitch. And then azimuth. I noticed that, of course, we have different roofs facing in different directions here, so we don't know exactly where it's all going to go, but we're going to say 180 degrees, which would be due south. So this would be the maximum amount, which would give us about 70. If we go to the next step here, gives us about 74,000 kilowatt hours per year of production out of that system. If they're not facing all due south, this will be a little bit less, but let's just go with this because we're making a lot of assumptions here. So I take my 50 kilowatt system and we're saying it produces 73,000. Now remember that they said in the video that they sized it for just over 100% of the system's power. So during the day, that system has to produce enough to power the home and charge the batteries. And then we're assuming that at night, we're going to discharge those batteries. So if we look at that, the average monthly usage, if we're at 73,000, is going to be about 6,000 kilowatt hours a month. The average daily would be about 200 kilowatt hours. Again, this kind of makes sense if you think about the size of the system. If they're using, let's say, about 100 kilowatts during the day, that system is producing 200. So it's enough to power the home plus charge the batteries. And then throughout the night, we're going to basically discharge about 100 kilowatt hours, which all kind of adds up. So I think we're pretty close here on the size of the system and how much power it's going to generate. So if we assume that rather than having the solar system and the batteries where they could essentially be off grid, now they're connected to the grid, I'm sure, and they're going to be drawing power sometimes from the grid and pulling it back. And like they talked about in the video, they could potentially, charge and discharge. But in a way, this is kind of, this could be an off-grid system just because of the way they sized it and how many batteries that they have. So if we're just saying that the home would actually use this much as what they sized it for, then the cost of buying that power would be close to $1,000 a month. Now, what I did to get to that, I pulled up the residential rates for Austin Energy. This is obviously going to vary based on your location, but you can go through their rate schedule, and I plugged this in based on a 6,000 kilowatt hour per month usage. It works out to an average rate of about 15.5 cents per kilowatt hour. Again, that makes sense. For Texas, we've been seeing rates go up a little bit. We used to be down closer to 10 or 12, but 15 doesn't sound that crazy, especially because Austin Energy has a tiered rate that charges more when you use more. And with a big home like this, it's going to use a lot of power. It kind of makes sense that this is where they would be. So when we think about what our savings is, really what we're saying is this system completely gets rid of that bill from Austin Energy that would be over $900 per month. So the annual savings is about $11,000 a year. The system cost was $224,000, but remember that we really only need to justify the portion that is after the rebates, which is the $184,000. So our simple payback is about 16 years. Now, 16 years sounds like a long time as far as a payback, but remember that most of the components in the systems here are going to last 25 years. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a cash flow analysis that is on a full 25-year system life. Now, apologize, guys. I threw this together pretty quick. Obviously, it's not very well formatted. I know we're going through a lot of numbers, but I think you'll get the idea if you're following the numbers of where we're at. So on the production side, we're starting out in year one with 73,000, and you'll notice that it decreases a little bit each year. Solar panels degrade over time, so we're assuming that each year they lose about 0.5% of their production. So over each year, we're actually going to generate a little bit less. Now, at the same time, our utility rate, what we would be buying from Austin Energy or whoever, tends to go up over time. That's just inflation. So we start at 15.5 cents, but I'm assuming that it's about 2.5% per year increase. And 2.5%, again, that's kind of like what we've always said was normal inflation. So it's a pretty good estimate. If we, I wouldn't recommend putting that up to, 3, 4, 5%, because it would make the numbers look really good, but that's maybe too aggressive. So we're going to stick with 2.5% per year. So if we just look at the savings here, before we have any cost, in year one, we're generating this from the savings of not buying the power. And then in year two is where I also plugged in that tax incentive. So they're going to get back that big chunk of money on the solar portion and the batteries. And let's say that comes about a year later when they file their taxes. And then each year the savings grow a little bit because the value of that power versus buying from the grid is greater. Now, from a cost standpoint, if we assume that they finance it, so this is based on, let's say they just rolled this into the mortgage, and I'm assuming here that they are paying about a 6% interest rate on their mortgage. I just made it a 25-year term. I know most mortgages would be 15 or 30, but just to keep everything on a 25-year term, I'm saying 6% over 25 years. So the extra payment is about $14,000 a year for just this portion, okay? Just the portion that they're financing, which is the incremental part, this $184,000, which is the extra cost for the system. So when we look at the net savings, the savings that we're generating versus the finance cost, we actually start out a little bit negative. Now we get a big positive chunk because of that tax credit in year 2. And then over time, eventually we get back to positive. And the reason is our payment is staying fixed, but our savings is growing because of that cost avoidance of buying. We're not having to worry about buying power from the grid that's continually getting more expensive. So when we look at this, if we just go through the total of what is the savings over the entire period, surprisingly enough, we are very close to break even. We're about $14,000 negative. But, $14,000 negative doesn't necessarily tell the whole story. Remember that we have time value of money. So I did my MBA about 10 years ago, and everything we do is all about time value of money and cash flows and what does that look like. So one of the metrics that I really like is net present value. Basically what it does is it takes all of these different items and it discounts them back to 1 year. One other thing I forgot to mention before I go much further is on the battery systems. So if we are using the batteries the way that we're talking about, we're basically charging them each day and then we're discharging them at night. They only have a finite life of how many times we can do that. The batteries come with a 10-year warranty, but the better way to look at it is how much power can you put through them in a discharge cycle over time. And I ran the numbers on it, and it works out to where we probably need to replace these batteries somewhere around 10 years. So just to make it simple, I said that in year 13, so basically halfway through, we're having to replace the batteries. And I assume that they cost, going back to here, this $80,500. Obviously, battery prices, may come down over the next 10 years. Inflation may go up. The tax credit may be here. It may not. So this isn't a perfect assumption, but I at least wanted to build in something to account for the fact that if we're looking at this long 25-year period, a portion of this is going to need replacement through the system life. So we look at all that together and we do that net present value. Now we actually come out to a positive number. Now, net present value requires a discount rate. I put in 6%, which basically means if the owner is trying to get a 6% return on their money, is it worth doing this? And the answer is yes, because this net present value number is positive. Now, maybe a simpler way to look at it is just what's my rate of return? So let's assume that the owner just paid cash for the system. So they had to pay that premium of $184,000 out of pocket on year 1. They're going to have some savings on year 1, and then they're also going to have that big tax benefit that comes in year 2. And now each year, they're not having to make a payment to the bank. They're just getting the savings, except for year 13, where they have to go replace those batteries. So this is more of a situation if you don't consider a finance payment like a mortgage. You just say, if I just paid it up front, what would it look like over time? So when we do this, we can do this in a rate of return. So this sounds a lot more like what you would expect of, what's the return on a stock. And it works out to about 7.5%. So not only is this a positive in the sense that they're going to save money versus just having a standard metal roof, they actually are going to have a return in their investment of around 7.5%. And when you think about, this is a fairly certain investment. Obviously, there's assumptions in here. There may be maintenance. There may be different things, but that's not a bad return on your investment. So not only are they getting the backup power, because remember that we accounted for in this cost not just the fact that we have the solar, but we also have the batteries, which give us a lot of resiliency. We could definitely carry the entire home probably for 12, 15 hours. And then because of the span panels, if they wanted to, they could program in different sequences where if the power goes down and they wanted to conserve a little bit, maybe they're not running the air conditioners, they're just running critical circuits. I mean, these batteries could last days if they're just powering, lighting and the refrigerators and some things like that. But we're also accounting for the cost of these two big generators. So what they would likely do is maybe program into the system to have, initially they're going to run everything on the batteries. If they're still without power, let's say after 4 hours or 6 hours, maybe they say, hey, we're going to go to kind of a more conserve mode, and they shut off some circuits and extend that a little bit. And then eventually, if they're really getting down to it, maybe they say, we're going to kick on those generators so we can still run our air conditioners and keep the home comfortable, as well as all those critical circuits. So what we're saying here is that rather than just spending $40,000 on a standard standing seam metal roof for a home like this, they can pay that premium for all these benefits and have green power. We're not even accounting for selling renewable energy credits or anything like that. And that premium of almost $200,000 actually has a return on investment of around 7.5% because of the savings over time. Now, when we look at an analysis like this, I understand that this isn't a perfect analysis. I put it together pretty quickly. There's a lot of assumptions over size and cost, and we could work this in a lot of different ways. But I think it gives you an idea that we are very close now to being able to do solar, even on the residential side, and it makes economic sense. The 30% tax credit is obviously huge. Some areas have utility rebates. We didn't account for that. I think Austin Energy pays about $2,500 in utility rebate, but some locations it'll be even larger. So we have all these different pieces that we can work in that really make the economics make sense, whether it's on residential or commercial. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed this video, and I know it's kind of a geeky, finance thing. If you're interested in this type of thing, what I'll do is I'll link to a resource article that I wrote that is you can download from our website. And what this will give you is kind of some more information. It's about 15 pages, and it's just on residential solar in general. And like I said at the beginning of the video, I don't really do a lot with residential solar as a company, but I get asked about it all the time. So what I wanted to do was give a resource and kind of give some education. So one of the things that I see is a lot of homeowners are getting approached by these solar companies that don't really consider all of these different things. They don't put in the rates right. They don't understand net metering and all the different laws, and homeowners tend to get ripped off. And I don't want to see that. So I created this free resource. You can download it. And then if you guys want me to do an actual detailed analysis, it'll be a little bit more professional than this. We'll actually run it through the software and really get into your specific system. But I do offer that as well as an analysis. And there's information that you can get on that resource as far as purchasing that to be able to kind of to do this type of analysis and give an evaluation of a residential solar system for you. So hopefully this has been helpful. I know it's kind of a unique video for the channel. Appreciate you guys watching, and please comment or send any questions if you have them. Thank you all, and God bless.